Hi, Bath, and welcome to the Media Hack Vodcast. Every day this week, we'll be bringing you the latest gossip, hot takes, and expert views on what's happening with the SU elections. Today, we have Freya with us, the current community officer, and we'll be asking her about the ups and downs of elections campaigning, what she thinks of this year's competition, and their goals. Just to quickly introduce ourselves, I'm Darcy, I'm editor-in-chief of Bath Time, your student magazine, and I'm a final year Spanish and Politics student. Millie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm also final year French and Italian, and I kind of do some multimedia news stuff for student media, working on these kind of exciting projects.
Hi, I'm Mahisha. I'm also a final year management student, and I'm the executive producer for Campus TV.
Fantastic. And our guest today is none other than Freya Jackson. Freya, can you give us a few words?
Hello, thank you. As you said, I'm a current community officer. So I graduated last year, psychology graduate. Not that it really felt like I graduated at all, but I did. I did my dissertation and then started this role. So I've been in this role since June. And I've been very much enjoying it, although I'm really missing seeing people's faces. So it's really nice to see in some extent. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. We're going to ask a few questions. We're going to get down to some nitty gritty about elections. So the first thing we want to ask you is, what's the most eye-catching policy proposal you've seen so far from either candidate? And that can be either eye-catching in a good or a bad light.
Oh, good or bad light? Okay, so I guess I'd say less policy. Things I find really interesting, I think, is going to be to do with the biggest challenge that's going to be next year, which would probably be, for me, the community building. So the suggestion from Helene about being able to match people on their sports, their interests, areas like that. I don't think people would necessarily see that as a key area to be part of the community role, but actually I think this role kind of adapts with everything and all the challenges that are faced. And I think next year that's going to be a huge challenge when we look at how do people feel involved in the SU, how do we rebuild that community, and especially where we've got a cohort this year who haven't been able to be involved in societies and groups. I don't think it can be all on committees to try and do that recruitment stage. And so I think something like that with matchmaking, at first I was like, oh my God, I would hate that idea, especially if it was done like virtually or, if someone introduced me that way. I think it would be very time consuming, and I'd like to see the kind of ideas behind how it would be possible. Because ISA have done something similar this year. So they had over 200 people sign up, and they've done ISA families, but it's taken them a really long time to kind of match people themselves. So I think the easiest way to do something like that would be having funding to be able to get, an external company or an app to do it. I think that's really interesting and not necessarily something that people see as the community side. And then I guess also on Helene's, maybe on a bit more of a whether I think it's possible side would be the affordability. So I think looking at some of the student bursaries, as much as I think they're a really great idea, and I think that people should put on their manifesto whatever they want, whether they are necessarily going to be achievable or not, because also before you start this role you don't know how much is achieved, and I think you do have to kind of aim high. But I would be interested to see how Helene would plan to implement those. So that's kind of, sorry, I know you asked for one answer and I've gone both on Helene. In terms of Meg's side, I'd really be interested in her male mental health campaign. It's something that this year I've really wanted to focus on, working with Andrew and Student Services. But it's really hard to move away from just a week that's about male mental health. And so I think Meg has the experience to make sure that any campaign they did with male mental health would be something that's there, not just as a tokenistic gesture. So I think that one from her is definitely really interesting. But yeah, sorry to give you a long answer.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, they're very interesting campaigns, and with everything being so strange, would you have any advice for Meg and Helene campaigning this week?
Honestly, they're both doing absolutely amazing. I think it's hard when you don't have that in person. Your energy levels are always going up and down, and when you're in person, you kind of feel other people's excitement around it. So my advice for both of them, and I've said to both of them, is stay in your lane. It's really easy when you're going against someone to see it as, naturally people who run in elections are competitive. But the minute you start looking at the other person and thinking, oh my God, they're doing this and I'm not doing this, you start putting all your energy into what you're not doing rather than concentrating on what you are doing. And both of them have written manifestos that represent what they would like and from the students that they've spoken to. And so I think my biggest bit of advice with them is carry on with what you're doing. You wrote this manifesto, it came from a place that you wanted it to be, and just keep showing your passion rather than looking at what the other person is doing and letting that take you down. I think you need to know what they're doing to an extent so you can respond, but constantly looking at, you know, the other person's social media and how many views or likes they've got on something, it's really unproductive. So that would be my biggest bit of advice.
Do you have any campaign goals that like you were unable to act upon due to this pandemic? And like, do you really want your successor to continue upon it?
Yeah, so both of them mentioned Never Okay on their manifestos, and that's been something that when I ran, I really wanted to do, and actually have been working on a lot this year. Also, I'm really sorry if you can't hear me. It says I've got bad network. Can you hear me okay? Cool, I'll carry on talking. What was I saying, Never Okay? It's something that I've been doing loads on this year. It's a recreating campaign called Be the Change. We were going to relaunch it at the start of this year, and we decided not to because the biggest issue for me with Never Okay is that although it was great in a lot of ways, it didn't necessarily have all the resources behind it. And so for me, what would be the point of launching something in September just so it came under my year without having all of those resources, everything that we needed the campaign to have and be? And so it's been something that's been worked on throughout the year. It will have a soft launch in April, which has like the 3 key kind of main trainings. I won't go into it in lots of detail. And then in September, it will launch for the new cohort of students. And so where we might have been introduced to Never Okay, they'll be introduced to Be the Change, which is a much wider harassment campaign. And as I said, I would much rather that was carried on by the person after me, because ultimately, as much as it feels like my baby, that campaign was never for me. It was for like the students who are here, as cringy as that sounds. And so I really hope, and I know that either whoever is elected will carry on with that work, and just make sure that it's exactly what we want, and then get buy-in from student groups to actually be able to adopt that culture and take part in the trainings. And yeah, I won't go into loads of detail, but I think for me, I just hope they were able to carry on.
So, more sort of broadly looking at the relationship with university, the phrase holding the university to account is a phrase that's thrown around quite a few manifestos this year and in other years. During your time as community officer, on what issues did the uni need to be held to account?
For me, the biggest example I can think of here in this area, and I want to be careful about what I say, that would be report and support. So when I came into this role, I obviously knew of report and support. As a student, I had like a few questionable things, but I didn't know the back end of it. And it's a tool that the university, you know, they designed, they did the work for. But as an SU, we also, you know, promote it to students. And I didn't feel comfortable pushing something that I didn't know whether it was actually effective or not. I wanted to see how they were dealing with cases. And so we have a group called the Harassment Prevention Working Group. And when I first came into this group, nothing was happening. Like everything felt really stood still. Like it was like just nothing was changing. And so it was felt really uncomfortable to tell people to be using this tool and telling people to report things when actually people didn't know how the tool, like how their case would be managed, how it would be dealt with. There were people who were unhappy with how their cases were being dealt with. I think as well it's hard when reports come from different areas of the university, how you make sure through the exact same procedure. There's a word looking for that, I can't find it. Coherent, I can't remember what I was going to say. But for me, that was the biggest thing to actually come into say, what are you doing? Where is the resource here? Because as an SU, you're asking us to promote this tool to students, but until you actually make the tool something we want to promote, it's not going to happen. And so where we lobby, put that on I know I hate the word lobby, but put that on the top 10. We do actually now have a working group specifically for report and support that meet every week, and they've designated someone who has the capacity to be working on it. So whether that's the technical side and adjusting the questions, there's quite a lot to it, so I really won't bore you. So at the moment, like making videos to explain to people how you can report, who you can go to for support, and also using case studies, which obviously won't be obvious who they are, and they've agreed to let us use them to show this is how your case can be used. But it is a bit of a weird one, and I know the word gets thrown around a lot and doesn't necessarily always mean things to people. But yeah, I'll stop rambling now.
No, that was really helpful, because I think it's very helpful for students to see examples where those phrases in real life. With all the campaigning being online, as you've already mentioned, Helene and Meg are both doing a great job already, but how do you think it will impact their campaigning and potential success with the fact that everything's on social media this week?
Yeah, I think it's definitely hard. I think everyone has their own style. So whether that's talking to people on parade or talking to people, on a night out, or, just being sat in the SU, sometimes even just seeing someone around their friends can make a difference on how you vote, because you can see their interactions they have with people. And so I really feel for everyone who is campaigning this year, because you don't see a person from all of their angles in the same way. You're only seeing them from one way. And we know social media can be really hard to actually get your personality across. And you're so, subjected to how people choose to interpret that. I think also it creates, like I was saying earlier, about the kind of how many likes has someone got and how many comments. It's also really hard to tell how we're doing, because you're not getting that same kind of feeling of hearing people on your course or who they're voting for. And you're also doing all your learning online. So you're not having any distinction where you can separate the two. I remember being on parade and just being really stressed and needing to go. I just went and found a building where no one would be and just sat and ate my lunch. There was a lot less going on in social media, and some of my campaign team were doing that, and I could switch off. Whereas now, you can't do that in the same way. You don't have that kind of escape. And I think I didn't really completely answer your question there, but when you said whether it would have an advantage on one or the other, I think that thing where you can't show your whole personality might impact it slightly. And again, yeah, you're only campaigning from one avenue rather than four. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I really can't tell with almost any of the candidates what will happen.
Do you feel like any of the campaign goals listed by the candidates are a bit too ambitious or a bit too far out their reach? Do you feel like any of them?
I think, as I said before, some of Helene's ones on affordability. I think she mentioned about the tuition fees for international EU students.
Yeah.
However, I also think it's a really important issue. Put it on there. You also don't know what's achievable before the role, so I didn't really know. And I think also Helene's been very honest in saying that from the start. I know from ISA that's something that, if she'd spoken to ISA, that's their main issue at the moment, and they want to be able to lobby the government and the university. Because, people want to know why they are paying so high fees for international students. So even if that's actually getting a breakdown of where is this money going to, can you actually justify why international students are paying this fee? So I would say that is ambitious, but I wouldn't say it was a bad thing to have put that on a manifesto. I think if it's something that you're passionate about and you put it there. I think the other thing that's come up for both candidates is about, extending social events throughout the year, or this idea of like an extended Freshers Week. And a lot of people think that's unachievable. From my point of view, I actually think that some of them have got a bit too much criticism for that being impossible, because I see it as actually, if you ask a university as an SU for the money for that, there are so many good things that come out of doing continued freshers activities. That's how we get people to get involved in, SU clubs and sports. You can also have like a more internal Freshers Week where more of the SU groups are involved. They need committees, people involved, and so actually massive effects, both financially in terms of the community society. Again, going a bit off of your question, I think that would be the biggest one for me, that some of the affordability side of stuff would be the most ambitious and potentially not possible. And I think both of them have got quite realistic goals in most of the other areas. There's work that's already happening and how they plan to continue it and also make it their own.
Fab. That was a brilliant answer. We have one more question, which isn't quite to do with campaigning, but it's sort of the longevity of the community officer role. Other universities have disaggregated the community position into smaller roles, like wellbeing officer, for example. Do you think we'd benefit from this, or do you think community is an easy enough remit to define?
I haven't spoken to anyone about this, and I don't think people in the SU would necessarily agree with me. But I would see the advantage of it. I find it really hard when people ask me what I do to explain it. Volunteering has now moved over to activities, which made far more sense. And I was feeling like I couldn't give it my all to all areas, especially when I've been really involved with volunteering before this year. To then not be able to put loads into it was quite sad. You've got housing, and how does housing necessarily connect with the mental health and well-being? I said it actually in an interview I did with Meg earlier on in the week, but we were saying that actually where mental health and well-being have become bigger for the university to prioritise, I do see other universities have that I see the kind of benefits of having an officer in that role, whether it be something full-time, and obviously our university doesn't have part-time officers. I also really see the benefit of having a part-time officer that is specifically looking at like student welfare. The university have now signed up or is working on the Student Minds Mental Health Charter, and there's a lot to achieve across the university, and that's the university role to do, but there's also part of the SU needs to do, and I think, again, using that word accountability, there's a role for the SU to bring in that student voice and actually identify the gaps and speak to the students about what they want. You could see community as such a wide range of things. I even think if the role was called community and welfare, which is what the SPA now call this role, because yeah, you can choose how much you each bit of the role does, but for me a huge part has been that well-being, the mental health side. Sorry, I really talk for hours, so please stop me if I just keep rambling, but yeah.
No, that's fine. That was another fantastic answer from you. We love a rambler. Do the two other speakers want to comment or anything, or have any last questions? I'm happy to wrap up here otherwise.
I think it's all for me. So
okay, fantastic. Well, voting's opened and it closes tomorrow. So on that note, thank you for joining us, Freya, and thanks for listening and watching us, everyone. We're here all week. Have a good week. Bye.